Hey guys, welcome to the Janus Project. We have a lot of stuff coming up for you this next year, and what I'm going to ask you to do is, as we get ready for it, I would like you to hit that subscribe button if you're not already subscribed to the channel. If you are subscribed, I'm going to ask you to hit that bell icon, throw a like on this video, and leave a comment below. Let me know what topics you want me to cover, and let me know what topics you're more interested in that I have not yet gotten to. And so guys, if I could ask you, just hit a like, subscribe, hit that bell icon, and let's just see how much content I can churn out over the next year. Welcome to the Janus Project this week. Like I said, I am going to be talking about the doctrine of Christmas this week. Now, for those of you who don't know, Christmas is a celebration of the birth of Christ. Now, there's all sorts of controversy, there's all sorts of questions. People go back and forth as to when and all of that good stuff. But summarize it to say this. December 25th is the date that we celebrate the birth of Christ. Due to some calendar issues, the Eastern Orthodox Church celebrated about 12 or 13 days later, and some of that has to do with calendar issues and just other things. I am going to link you to a blog in the description. It's called the Triablogue. It's on Blogspot. The guy's been blogging for forever. But what he does each year is he collects all the articles that he's written on Christmas, and he puts them all together, and so I'm going to link you over there. I'm not going to bother going through all of it, but one of the big things as we get into Christmas is people will argue back and forth about the date of the birth. I don't think it's a big deal. The Bible never says exactly when. It tells us that shepherds were on the hillside, that shepherds were feeding their flocks, and the angels appeared, and apparently the time it took for the wise men to get from where they were over to the baby's house left enough doubt that Herod decided he was going to kill everyone 2 years and younger. And so I don't believe the wise men actually got to Jesus's manger there in Bethlehem in time. I think he probably had settled into a house. Joseph, his kind of adopted father, may have been doing some work, but the picture you see of the nativity, where you've got the shepherds and the animals and the wise men, I don't know that the wise men actually made it at that time. So here's kind of the rough chronology if you want to know about the birth of Christ and what would happen. There was some sort of census. Now, in that day, the whole idea when Cyrenius was governor of Syria. Interestingly enough, Cyrenius wouldn't have actually been governor at the time of Christ. That's something that a lot of atheists and stuff will bring up to be like, whoa, how does that work? Most likely he was not actually the governor at the time of Christ. And so in Luke, when it says this taxing was first made when Cyrenius was governor of Syria, we know who that guy is from history. But what happened is potentially 6 BC, I think, someone is going to correct me on it, he was actually the governor of Syria. And the time when Jesus would have had to have been born would not have lined up very easily with Cyrenius being the governor. So most likely the explanation is it would be like us talking right now about Obamacare. And if anything happened with Obamacare right now, obviously Obama hasn't been in office for about 4 years, but his name is on it. He kind of instituted some of those policies that are still carrying through. And so Cyrenius would have kind of orchestrated, all right, we're going to have this census, everybody's going to do this thing. And for some reason, along with that census, Joseph and Mary at about this time would have had to come down to Bethlehem. And as they traveled down to Bethlehem, just as they got there, the inn was full. And so there would have been kind of overflow, like, hey, you can stay over here in this building. And so they stayed again in basically the barn. And so they went and they stayed there. They didn't have like a crib or anything, so Jesus would have been wrapped in swaddling clothes, and he would have been laid in a manger. And so it's showing the humility that Jesus had coming to earth. And so those are just some of those discrepancies that people argue about, but that's kind of this timeline. Now, we don't know exactly when he was born. Our calendar goes from basically 1 BC to 1 AD. There's no year 0, so that kind of messes up the whole thing by at least a year. When they swapped over from the Julian to the Gregorian calendar, they messed up a few years as well. So there's a lot to take in. So people estimate he could have been born, all the way back at 6 BC. Who knows? So we have some rough ideas. We say he was born, 0. Most likely not. He was probably born about 6 BC, or give or take a few years. Now, as Jesus was born, he was fulfilling a few prophecies. Now, there's a prophecy in Isaiah. There's some prophecies in Micah, and again, you can look at all the statistics of the chances that Jesus would fulfill all those prophecies, and they're staggeringly high. I'll give you a reference to the book "The Case for Christ," which is again a really good reference for just some of the reasons why we believe Christ would actually have been the Messiah. But again, he's fulfilling prophecies. There is enough vagueness in the "and a virgin shall conceive and bring forth a son" that it could have been fulfilled in Isaiah's day, with the prophecy there. But also, because of the use of the word and because of the Greek translation of that Hebrew word, it means virgin in the New Testament. And so it had a fulfillment in the day it was made, in the day that prophecy was made, where a virgin shall conceive. And then as the New Testament writers took that, they saw it as a picture presenting into the future as well. And so that virgin shall conceive, what that does is, in Christian theology, the sin nature is passed down through the man. That's kind of this idea. Adam sins, and so death passed upon all men, and so it's kind of understood that the sin nature is going to get passed down through the man's line. So that could be some of the significance of the virgin birth, where he is not going to be a recipient of the sin nature. It's also a miracle. It's one of those things that if God can create life at creation, is it really far-fetched to believe that he can create a single life inside of a woman who has not had sex? And so that's part of it, because what happens is the angel comes to Mary and says, "Hey, you are blessed among women," and she goes, "Okay," and he says, "You are going to have a child," and this holy thing, and he goes on and he discusses it. And she's confused because, again, she's never had sex before. She's a virgin. And she says, how is this so? The Bible's coy about it. They use the expression, "I have not known a man." But the idea here throughout the Bible, when they use that expression, at least in that sense, again, it has to do with sexual. And so she's saying, how does that work? And so the angel basically says, with God all things are possible, and she believes it. Now, it's interesting, because there's another character that's going to show up in Jesus' story. It's his cousin, John the Baptist, John the Baptizer. And just a few months before Jesus is born, Mary's really, really old cousin gives birth to a son. And that is a miracle in itself, because Zechariah, who's the husband in that situation, he is in the temple. An angel appears to him and says, "You are going to have a child." And he's like 80 some odd years old. And he goes, "How on earth is that going to work?" And it's interesting because he doubts, and what the angel basically says is, because you doubted, you're not going to be able to speak till he's born. But Mary, she says, "How is this going to be? I don't know. I've never known a man." And it seems that God can basically say, I knew her heart. She was confused. She didn't understand how it was going to work, and I explained. Whereas Zechariah was expressing doubt, and so God punished him for it. Now, it's interesting. John the Baptist and Jesus are they're cousins. All right. And so John the Baptist comes about 6 months earlier. He is going to prepare the way. That's something that's prophesied in the Old Testament, that the spirit of Elijah will come again. And John the Baptist, he's going to be out there in the wilderness. He's going to be a desert preacher. Really kind of a kooky guy. He's going to be dressed in camel skin and eat locusts. And, he's just a interesting character. And he's actually going to call out Jesus for who he is, the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. But that's all the stuff that's surrounding Jesus' birth. Now, as Jesus is born, the chronology seems to play out this way. You have to kind of put the 4 Gospels together and cross-reference some things. But Joseph and Mary, they go down. Joseph, when he finds out Mary is pregnant, he wants to put her away, which is basically give her a bill of divorcement, because they had not yet officially gotten married yet. Basically, they were engaged. And the angel says, no, she's been faithful. This is basically the Messiah who's there. And so Joseph stayed with her. And there is some legends and rumors that, they never consummated the marriage and all of that. They did. Later on, you'll find passages where Jesus will talk about having other brothers and sisters. In fact, one of the James that writes in the Bible is the brother of Jesus. And they'll try to explain that away by saying, oh, well, sometimes cousins, they use the words brother and stuff like that. Take the plain meaning of the text. There's no reason that Mary could still be a virgin. There's nothing sinful about the sexual relationship. God was making a special case to say, Mary, you're going to have a child without this process. And so it's very clear that they would have just continued with a normal marriage relationship afterward. But this whole idea that Mary was a perpetual virgin, no biblical ground for it. In fact, the disciples literally say, Jesus, your mother and your brethren are out. And he says, who are my mothers and who are my mother? Who is my brethren? But these. And he talks about people of the faith. And so Jesus very clearly is saying, like, you are my direct family. You are closer to me than family if you are there. So that's a conversation for another time, but Jesus would have been the eldest. He would have had at least one brother, James, and potentially other brothers and sisters. And that's where that plays out. Now, in a lot of old pictures of it, obviously drawings, they would always draw Joseph as an old man. And the reason they would do this is to show that he really wasn't the father of Jesus, and that, he was basically a caretaker of Mary. There's no evidence that would present Joseph as an old man. Yes, he was a carpenter and he had some sort of established business of sorts, but there's nothing to suggest that Joseph would have been just this old, like 90-year-old man running around with a teenage girl. That's not the case, okay? There's nothing to say that Joseph couldn't have been around Mary's age. I mean, he could have been a little bit older. There's some fun things if you want to read in the Bible and figure out how old certain people were when they got married. The one that kind of freaked me out was Jacob and Rachel, Rebecca, whoever he married. He was quite older if you do the chronology there. It's kind of fun. But those are some of the misconceptions if you are familiar with some of the material. And so Jesus clearly had other siblings. Joseph probably was not this ancient guy running around with Mary. He was espoused to Mary. She was set to be his wife. They were kind of in that espousal, what would be close to like our engagement period. They go down to Bethlehem to be counted for the census, and while they are there, the days are accomplished that she should be delivered. Basically, she's going to give birth. She gives birth. The shepherds show up. The angels kind of tell them about it. The shepherds show up and celebrate the arrival of Jesus. At some point, they take him into the temple, and there's some really old people there who have been waiting for the Messiah to come, and they celebrate because they realize who he is. At some point during this time, they run into the wise men, and in the process, the wise men, who probably came from somewhere where Daniel would have been, that's probably why they would have known some of these prophecies. And the wise men realized through an astronomical phenomenon. Basically, there's a star in the sky. They don't know what it is, and so there's some sort of astronomical thing happening that attracts them to the east. And they said, we've seen his star and we've come to worship him. And so they come wandering over, but they go because they think it's going to be a royal birth. They go to Herod first. And Herod, he's the king there. He's kind of set up by the Roman Empire. And Herod is there, and he's like, oh, a king. Oh, okay. And so he says, I need you to find out where he is. And once you find out where he is, I want you to come back and tell me, because I want to celebrate with you. And obviously he's using this as a ploy to find out where Jesus is so we can go kill him, because he thinks it's going to be a usurper to the throne. And so the wise men, they go down, they bring their offerings. We don't know how many wise men there were. The reason it's 3 is because there's 3 types of gifts. So however many came, who knows? We don't know their names. Some names have come down from tradition, and so Gaspar and some other ones. If you go look up Chrono Trigger, some of the characters in that are named after him. So there you go, little pop culture reference for you. And so they come down, and God basically tells them, do not go back the way you came, because Herod is going to kill the child. And so don't go tell Herod. So they go back a different way. Herod realizes that he's been despised by the wise men. He's been ignored. And so what Herod does is he basically says, all right, so that star appeared at this time, so we're just going to kind of cast a swath, a big broad net, and all the 2-year-olds and under in this area are going to get killed. just in case one of them's there. And so that is another fulfillment of prophecy if you look in the Old Testament. And the cool thing about the New Testament is that it will constantly reference the Old Testament. There will be all of these little phrases and little comments. Some of them weren't even clear that it was a reference to Jesus in the Old Testament, and the New Testament just sheds light on it. So one of them, it has to do with this situation. Joseph is warned by an angel to go down into Egypt for a while. So he flees Israel, and he kind of goes down, heads into Egypt. So he stays in Egypt for a little while, basically until Herod is dead, and then he goes back up in. But I believe it's Luke, when he's discussing this, he says, out of Israel, out of Egypt have I called my son. Well, that was a prophecy of Israel coming out with the Exodus. But clearly it was another foreshadowing. And so Jesus, in a way, is kind of a picture of Israel. You know, he's gone into exile, and he's coming back up out, and he's going to move back up into the promised land, and so on and so forth. And so there's some symbolism there. Again, some of the symbols weren't clear until you looked back at it and went, okay, gotcha. And so there's again a lot of figures there that, you know, like the virgin shall conceive. It was talking about a literal woman who would give birth and how long it would take before their enemies were destroyed, and talked about, you know, they will be destroyed before this child knows the difference between, you know, to choose the sweet and all that. It was a prophecy that was fulfilled back in that day, but as they translated it in the Greek for the Septuagint, they actually recognized there was more to this than met the eye, and so they actually would translate it to mean virgin rather than just young girl. And so that's where you'll see some discrepancies and some people arguing back and forth. And so Joseph is going to take Jesus down into Egypt, and then he's going to come back out, and they're going to basically settle there in Nazareth. And so Jesus is going to be a Nazarene, not a Nazarite. Okay, he doesn't take a Nazarite vow, you know, all that good. He lives in Nazareth, so he's a Nazarene. And there's a lot of racism against the Nazarenes. In fact, some of Jesus' disciples, when they find out he's from Nazareth, they're like, does anything good come out of Nazareth? And so that's kind of like a byword, because that's where they're from. So that's the Christmas story. It's God sending Jesus to earth through a virgin mother, which again is not heard of. It's not normal. But again, it's not so far-fetched if you believe that God could create. It's not really even far-fetched if you believe in evolution, because you ultimately believe all life came from a rock. So think about that. But the idea of a virgin birth is far-fetched if you don't believe that there could be a miracle. And so that's the miracle of it. And again, John the Baptist will go forward and all that. And so that's the story of Christmas. And that's why I think we should celebrate it. Now, I will tell you, I have a serious problem with Christmas. Now, back in the day, I used to have a problem with Christmas because I was like, it's just a pagan holiday, and it means Christ's Mass because it's Catholic. No. Christmas was being celebrated around that time, way before the Catholic Church came into effect. Most likely it's not based on just a ton of paganism, because the Christians who would have celebrated some of that were very anti-pagan. They weren't just like, yeah, let's do everything the pagans do. They suffered persecution. And so what they did is they chose a date, and they went with it, and it was just a date there to celebrate the birth of Christ. And so I used to hate Christmas because I was like, it's just a pagan copycat. Okay, who knows? Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. It's a day they chose. I think it's just fine, okay? Here's why I hate Christmas, though, or hated Christmas. It's so commercialized. Everything about Christmas is just about stuff. It's a very greedy holiday. Now, I realize there's a vast number of people who give and give and give. But what we do is we're training our children to want and want and want. And it's a tough thing for me, because I like to show my love by giving people things. And so I have kids, and they have way too many toys. And they get to play with all of my toys too. And I want to give them things, but I have to realize they have too much. And so trying to train them to be generous and to think of other people. But then we set up a whole day that basically says, get stuff and play with it for one day and then throw it out. And so that's what really bothered me growing up. Once I realized it, I still enjoy getting stuff. And so I would challenge you guys, as you celebrate Christmas, as you think about Christmas, remember the story. Remember the greatness of who God is and what he's done. And he came to earth as a child. He lived this perfect life. And the reason he did that goes back to our doctrine of man discussion. If you remember back a few months ago, we talked about the doctrine of man. And in the doctrine of man, which is anthropology, we have this idea that mankind is sinful, and through Adam, we have all fallen into sin. Adam was like the perfect example, and he failed. All of us have flesh. All of us have worldliness to us. All of us do not desire to do what God has asked us to do. And God sends his son to live on this earth, and he makes it through. And he's tempted in every way like we are. Yet the Bible says he's without sin. And the reason he does that is because, as Hebrews will point out, Jesus can then be a high priest he can be touched by the feelings of our infirmities. What that means is Jesus came to earth, lived a perfect life, and he is someone who can relate to your struggles, to your need, to your suffering, to your sickness. He takes on all of that on earth. And he does it so that he, as God, can sympathize. He experiences everything, just like you do. And yet the Bible points out, yet he did it without sin. That should be a great comfort. The Bible says there were people who came to Jesus, and they wanted to see where he lived. And he's like, all right, well, I'll show you where I live. The foxes have holes to live in, and the birds have nests. I don't even have a place to lay my head. He was a vagabond. He was basically a traveling preacher who depended on the kindness of others to take him in. And so he made friends, and he lost people, and he suffered. And I think the beautiful thing of the creation story is Jesus knows what it's like to be poor. He knows what it's like to be taken care of. He knows what it's like to be neglected. He knows what it's like for every single one of his friends to turn on him. He knows what it's like to be hunted. He knows what it's like to be, you fill in the blank. But he also knows, hey, I know the experience of having mercy. I know the experience of having grace. I know the experience of being kind and yet holding to the holiness that needs to be held to. And so I think as we look at Christmas story, Jesus came and he gave of himself like no one has ever given. And he lived a perfect life, and then he would eventually die on the cross. And I think it's just an absolutely beautiful picture. And I would challenge you, celebrate Christmas. Celebrate it. Make it a holiday. We have enough Christian stuff under attack. Celebrate Christmas. Share the gospel story with your kids. You may have an argument about when the date should be or whether it was based on some paganism. The fact is, right now, in our culture, it doesn't mean that anymore. I wear a wedding ring that used to be a pagan symbol. It's not anymore. It's a symbol for the fact that I need to be faithful to my marriage vows. And if you're like, well, don't wear the ring because that was... Get over it. And so for all the reasons, and I'll link an article for some of the reasons why December 25th was chosen. We've chosen December 25th. Just get over it. Just get over it. Celebrate the day on the day when everyone else celebrates it. You can be a purist, you can gripe and moan, but we have bigger fish to fry than arguing about something as stupid as the date of Christmas. What does Christmas mean? What does Christmas represent? What can we do to celebrate Christmas properly? If you can't do it with a good conscience, okay, fine. But you don't have to drag everyone else along with you. We have enough to argue about. We have enough to fight about. Celebrate the greatest thing to ever happen to this planet, which was God coming in the flesh to get ready to save you. Celebrate. It's worthy of celebration. And so that is the doctrine of Christmas. It's also a little bit more of an explanation of who Jesus was and what he did. Now, Lord willing, next time we meet, at least for this type of discussion, I want to talk about some of the other impressions that people have of Jesus. So we're kind of continuing this series on what I would call Christology, because it's the study of Christ. We've put out a few videos so far kind of talking about some of those issues, but I want to continue this story because it is what the whole Bible points to. The whole Bible points toward Jesus. And so I want to continue that. Guys, thanks for tuning in. If you have not done so already, I'm going to ask you, please click that subscribe button, click the like button. It helps me get a little traction with the YouTube, all right? And click that little bell icon down in the corner as well. What that's going to do, that little bell icon, if you're not familiar with it, it's going to notify you every time I upload a video. And so every time I upload a video, it'll put a little boop in your inbox. If you have it on your phone, it'll pop up. And I'm going to ask you guys, please like it, share it, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below on a topic you want to hear or a topic I said I'd cover, but I still haven't. And so thank you guys for tuning in. This has been the Janus Project. I hope you guys have a Merry Christmas. Hope you have a great New Year. And Lord willing, I will see you after Christmas, but before New Year. All right, guys. See you around.